Hi, welcome to the third module in our series, Stress, What is it? And how to better manage it to improve your quality of life. So we've talked a lot about self-care and resiliency practices in Module 2 as ways to regulate, to basically down-regulate our nervous system. When we've had a tough day, when we've had a tough shift, and we are upregulated, our sympathetic nervous system is on fire, we are hypervigilant, we are tense, we are stressed, we're a little bit maybe angry or irritable or hyperreactive. What can we do to tone that back down so that we can balance ourselves out and we can get into that rest and recovery mode that comes with the parasympathetic nervous system being dominant? It's always a constant balance between sympathetic and parasympathetic. When there is a true threat, we want sympathetic to be dominant. When we're just trying to live our lives and have a good life, we want the parasympathetic to be dominant for all the reasons we talked about with our bodies and with our brains. So I mentioned resiliency. What is it really? It's a term that we hear quite a bit lately. It's defined as a human's ability to survive, adapt, and grow from adverse events, and thrive at home and at work. I really like that piece, grow. If you've been paying attention to any of the post-traumatic stress literature out there, over the past several years, there has been the emergence of this concept, post-traumatic growth. And I love it. You know, in the past, we treated trauma and adversity as bad things. But what we've learned is that if we really want to grow as a human, mentally and emotionally, just like we do physically, we need challenge. We do need some adversity. I mean, you don't go to the gym to get strong, but avoid lifting the heavy weights, right? If you want to get stronger, it's not just that you have to lift the heavy weights, but you have to give yourself the downtime, the recovery, so the muscle can rebuild itself. And we find with exposure to stress and to trauma, this is also true. We can't avoid all the stress in our lives. We just can't. It's part and parcel of our life. What we can do is recognize when stress is exceeding our capacity to manage it. When stress has exceeded our capacity to cope with it, that's when we start to develop stress injuries. Our capacity to cope is directly related to our resiliency. And going back to that post-traumatic growth concept, what we see is oftentimes people who've been exposed to extreme stressors, extreme trauma, don't come away broken. They come away in recovery mode. And when they recover effectively, they're that much more resilient. They're that much stronger moving forward. So there's this great quote from Ernest Hemingway that the world breaks everyone, but those that will not break, it kills. Those that do break are often stronger in the broken places. That's really the essence of post-traumatic growth, is when we are stressed and we learn to regulate that and we learn to recover ourselves, bring ourselves back to our baseline, we become better at it each time. So our capacity to manage stress increases. I think we've all seen somebody in our lives who is unflappable. Nothing bothers them. Him or her, they can handle it all and do it with a smile on their face. These people tend to be very resilient, and usually they're resilient because they have really good self-care practices in place. The good news around that is that we can all do that. It just takes being aware of what works for us and making it a habit in our lives. So I mentioned resilience behavior is a form of prevention. Just like going to the gym, you work your muscles until you get to the stopping point, and then you allow yourselves to recover. When you recognize that you have a pulled muscle or a strained muscle, you ease up. You don't try to get back in and have a heavy PR day, a heavy lift day. Same thing with stress. It's up to us to really recognize, wow, I am getting snippish, I am not sleeping so well, I'm having a really tough time in life, I don't know what's going on, and take a pause. It doesn't have to be a week vacation, it doesn't have to be a day off. It can be something small that is really restorative, that means something to us, that helps us reset our baseline. We know that our culture does value certain types of preventive training. Training that reduces and prevents physical injury is big. Workplace injuries, the whole OSHA thing, that's big. You teach your kids not to run out in the street, that's prevention. We have always traditionally been focused more on the physical threats. But when we look around at today's life and the impact that chronic stress has on our lives, the psychological threats are really the ones we need to be preparing ourselves and defending ourselves against. And that's what resiliency is. We know stress injuries are among our most prevalent injuries as a society. We talked about this in Module 1. Not only is it cardiac disease, diabetes, obesity, all of these medical conditions that are tied to high cumulative levels of stress, but it's also things like depression and anxiety and substance misuse. One of the big things that's been emerging in research over the past decade or more is this concept of neuroplasticity. We used to believe that once our brains were formed completely around the age of 25, that was it. Any damage after that we couldn't recover for. You can't teach an old dog new tricks, basically. And that's not true. Our brains are constantly growing. We can constantly rewire them. But we have to be careful because they are rewiring themselves. If we're in a state of negativity, if we're getting negative feedback from ourselves, from those around us, if we're constantly stressing ourselves out so that we're functioning in hyperreactive survival, that reptilian brain mode, we're teaching our brain to operate in that as its normal functioning. When we recognize that this isn't good and it's not leading to that healthy, high performance life we want, we can change it. We can take steps, engage to guide our mind. And this is part of the research that supports things like gratitude practices. And we'll talk about those in a few minutes. We can really change our mind for the better. And we know that everybody is resilient on some level. Along with the ability to rewire our brains, we have the ability to ingrain those resiliency practices so we can develop it further. So it's not a concerted effort. It's something that becomes just automatic for us. When we talk about resilience tools and changing our thinking, I know it can sound kind of woo-woo, Pollyanna-ish even, but it's not. Go back as far as Viktor Frankl. If you're not familiar with him, he was a psychiatrist in Austria in the early 1900s. He was also Jewish, and he and his family were rounded up by the Nazis and interned in a concentration camp. He had been working on his life's work, a paper that he had in his pocket with him at the time. When he arrived at the concentration camp, that document, his life's work, was burned in front of him. He was separated from his parents, from his wife, from his brother, all of whom died fairly shortly afterward. And then he survived for another 4 or 5 years in Auschwitz and other concentration camps. He revised his work, the things that he'd been working on while he was in his office in Austria, while he was in the concentration camp. And he wrote an amazing book when he was released called Man's Search for Meaning. The essence of it is that life has no inherent meaning or purpose. It's up to you to create your own. And when the challenges and the struggles you meet in life destroy that sense of meaning and purpose, it's up to you to create a new one based on what you've seen. You have to keep this up. You have to maintain hope. And he recognized, and this is a fantastic quote from his book, everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. And again, this wasn't Pollyanna-ish. This wasn't him sitting in a chair with smoking a pipe and thinking about things. This was him surviving in one of the worst periods in human history. And it's just phenomenal. And what I love about this is that we always have the ability to choose our own attitude, our own thoughts around what's happening to us. And lots of times when we're chronically stressed, we look at everything in our lives and get into the woe is me victim mindset. And it feels good. It feels low energy, and it is. But it's not helpful because when we get into that stress state, we have even less capacity to manage what's going on with us. So I find this as a way not to minimize our suffering. I don't think comparative suffering gets us anywhere. We shouldn't look at it and say, well, I shouldn't be feeling this way because Viktor Frankl survived so much more. What we can look at it is an inspiration. Viktor Frankl survived that, and I can survive what's going on in my life right now. And I really have control over my own thoughts. And when I control my thoughts, I control my nervous system reaction and the impact it has on my body. We talked a little bit about optimism in the first module. It is not being happy all the time. It's strategic reframing. It's recognizing, yeah, maybe I didn't get the job. Maybe I was in a car accident and I've broken my leg. Maybe I'm going through a divorce, but it's not the end of the world. What are the ways that I can see opportunity here? What can I learn from this? What can I use to grow from this? And what can I use to better my life? It's not easy, but when we make it a habit, when we force ourselves, when we catch ourselves with the negative self-talk and the negative bias, to reframe it and to see what the potential is, what the good is, we decrease our stress levels and we increase our quality of life. So lots of times we hear from people, what is the best resilience tool? Well, the simple answer is it's the one that you'll do because it's not just a tool, it's a practice. It's never a one and done with resiliency skills. Resiliency is about habits that we integrate into our lives on a daily or even more frequent basis to improve the quality of life and our health. So when you look at resilience practices, there are tons of them out there, and all of them have the potential to be great, But the ones that you choose should be things that are enjoyable to you. You don't want your resiliency practice to be a chore. You want something that's attainable, something that's doable on a daily basis easily. If you live in, say, a mountain town and one of your resiliency practices you choose is surfing, not really going to work. Yeah, surfing's awesome when you can do it, but there's no oceans up in the mountains. It's not something you can do. You should find something that's easy in your environment. You should have something that's self-sustaining, something that you see benefits from, and that it drives you. It becomes your own intrinsic motivation to do it. You're not doing this because somebody told you to. You're not doing it because you think it's a good idea. You're doing it because you really feel the benefits, and that's how we make it a practice. The other great thing about resiliency practices in making them habits is find some way to track it. A journal, an app, a fitness device, Whoop, anything like that keeps you accountable to, did you do this today? And then you're more likely to recognize if you're starting to feel more stressed out and your quality of life is suffering, you can look back and say, oh, I haven't been doing my breathing exercises, I've been skipping workouts, maybe I'm drinking too much. You can identify readily where you've gone off the track, and you can correct and come back to that healthier state of mind. So in the next module, we'll talk a lot more about what specific resilience habits and tools are and what drives them. It's essentially, we're all human. Even though many of us have superhuman expectations of ourselves, especially around our occupations, if you have a challenging caregiving occupation, nurse, doctor, emergency responder, wildland firefighter, teacher, an essential worker, a caregiver at home, these things we all just expect to keep piling the obligations, the responsibilities of these jobs onto our plate, oftentimes without any support, without any recharge, without any awareness that we have a human capacity. Just like a cell phone battery, we need to recharge our capacity now and then. If you don't charge your cell phone battery, you lose functionality, you lose power. Same thing as a human. The way we charge ourselves is meeting our basic human needs. We all have them, they're non-negotiable, but all of us, especially in these high demand lives, tend to think that we'll just make it work, we'll push through. And that doesn't work, but it's easy enough for us to recharge ourselves when we understand why, and that it's not weakness and it's not being soft on ourselves, it's being high performance oriented. So see you in the next module.